It's my privilege to come again today and minister to you, and I pray that this ministry will be effective and that you'll come away not only with devotional praise and thanksgiving, but also with greater wisdom concerning your faith and the paganism in which we're living in today. I'm going to use a term here that I coined. I don't know if anybody ever else has used this term or not, but in my writing, I have to designate a difference between Christianity and the Messianic faith. So I use Messianity or sometimes Messian as an adjective, which encompasses all of Judaism and all of Christianity. So when I use that term, Messianity, you'll know I'm thinking about the Judeo-Christian heritage that our country claims to be a part of. Also, I'm going to talk briefly about original sin. I don't know whether you believe in that doctrine or not. We're pretty much split as to whether we do or not. But for the time being, consider it a fact for this message anyway. And I thank you, Father, for the opportunity and ability to come forth today in word and to hopefully be your messenger of a truth that I have learned this week. I pray that the hearers will be blessed, honored, and educated. In the name of Yahshua, our Messiah. Amen. As what I believe was a sixth grade student, we were in class handed out something that we learned was a Petri dish. And in that Petri dish was something that looked like gelatin that we found was called agar. And our intention was to everyone in class grow some bacteria or grow some fungus, primarily to show that on coins, on fingers, on things that we use daily, there was some living creatures on there that we could not see. And I remember I took my Petri dish and followed the teacher's command. I took a nickel in my pocket and rubbed the nickel along the agar. Then I shut the Petri dish up. And it wasn't too long until on the place I rubbed, there was a colony of some kind of growth. And it started to spread out, and it was differently colored in different places. Soon enough, I marveled that that little touch from a nickel could cause an entire bacterial culture that filled the entire Petri dish. But then it didn't last that long because soon enough, it all died. And when the students and I asked the teacher why that didn't grow more, the teacher just simply said that that bacteria or whatever you were growing in there grew so much and ran out of space and died poisoned by its own waste products. And you could put that example to so many different situations in our country right now, especially the one we're facing right now in the advent of the murder of George Floyd. Most of human history is pagan. The advent of Messianity is a fairly recent affair. Some today say that Messianity is receding. Some say Messianity has not yet taken a firm hold. Is secularism taking a hold? Is paganism reemerging? Do we live in a strange time characterized by a return to paganism, though with Messian characteristics? Whichever account is correct, it has implications for America in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. The pagan world was one of many gods, each associated with a people who made payments and sacrifices to their gods, sometimes in blood. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, An influential 18th century Calvinist philosopher, wrote in The Social Contract that when pagan nations battled other pagan nations, people didn't battle people. Rather, pagan gods battled pagan gods. Gods against gods, blood vengeance was thought to cleanse the human rage of the pagan warrior nation. In the books of Israel, it's written that at the time when Israel was still pagan, the blood avenger was a special tribal individual tasked by the god with cleansing the blood of the tribe by means of the shedding of blood of those of the offending tribe. We find this tribal concept many places in the scripture, but especially I'm thinking of the book of Job, perhaps the earliest book of the Bible, in 1925. A familiar verse, but now translated appropriately. For I know that my blood avenger lives, and he will stand upon the land at the end. That Hebrew word there, sometimes translated as redeemer, but correctly translated blood avenger, is the word gaoli. And it's 1350 in your Strongs if you care to look it up. Goali, G-O-A-L-I, which means blood avenger. Yet the concepts of Messianity toppled the pagan concept of the Goali blood avenger. Eventually, the cleansing rage of war, Messians argued, in which one nation purged another through bloody vengeance, couldn't solve the problem of original sin, a term that can mean that sin is already there, prior even to a person being born into a tribe, a country, or family of Elohim. The Bible often calls this type of sin iniquity, not sin of omission or sin of commission, but sin that's assigned before the sinner's birth or even before his or her conception. As such, blood vengeance cannot expiate iniquity, and the sins of my people can no longer be purged by bloodthirsty rage towards your people. Such strategies of atonement, they don't work for original sin. That's why Rousseau concluded that his brand of Christianity had ruined politics and had produced a civilization of pacifists. If you doubt this, think about Christianity's well-developed doctrine of a just war. If you're not familiar with the just war, consider looking into it, especially in the pages of Quakers and Mennonites, two traditionally pacifist religions. And every time America goes to war, these pages are studied intently by those who are to conduct the war. I remember the last time that we really looked into this was in about 2003, when we attacked Iraq, and there was quite a bit of discussion about whether we should or shouldn't go in there. And some of that discussion was about blood vengeance. Against the backdrop of the world's pagan history, Messianism is revolutionary, not evolutionary. Paganism, had it evolved along with the technology unto today, would have sprouted all manner more of ingenious bloodletting war tools to relieve gang rage toward other people, other nations, just as we read in the book of Enoch. Messianity declared that no matter what evolutionary advance paganism might bring, it could never adequately address the problem of man's original innate sin. Messianity was revolutionary because it declared that we must look elsewhere than toward the other to unburden our rage and expiate our sin. That elsewhere would be toward the divine, not the mortal. And as we know, only through Messiah, the divine scapegoat, Elohim's Geoli, who takes upon himself the sins of the world, can man be cleansed and converted. If Messianity is receding, and I think that there can be no doubt that it is receding exponentially, then we will likely see the return of the pagan understanding that peoples are the proper objects of cathartic rage. And that is a sobering truth. Let's get them for this, which defenders of secularism deny, if not in their words, in their actions, even if they describe themselves in benevolent or even Christian terms. The real alternatives might not be Messianity or secularism, but rather revelation or paganism. Which? Should we return to paganism? One people will seek out to cleanse themselves of stain by venting their cathartic rage on another people. The war between the gods of the nations would resume in full. The blood and soil nationalism that's straining to emerge on both the alt-left and alt-right is a witness to the re-emergence of this pagan view, which is contemptuous of Messiah's counterclaim and offer of redemption, and always will be. What counts in the pagan world of blood is not me, the person, but the people of which I am but a representative. What counts in Messianity is the Adam, whose stain I present, and Messiah's sacrifice, through which I am represented to Elohim as righteous. The distance between these two understandings is infinite and unbridgeable. If by some divine good fortune Messianity someday takes hold fully, it will be inconceivable for us to think of ourselves in terms of members of blood nations, or to think of ourselves as member of races, or to think of justice in terms of blood retribution. We will all be adopted sons and daughters of Elohim, according to Romans 8 and Galatians 3, whose merely genetic markers of peoplehood, exhumed these days by Ancestry.com and other organizations, tell us nothing, really, about who we are. In such a world, there will be no nations and peoples, only persons who know that their transgression, their stain, runs so deeply that only Messiah can cure it. In such a world, racism, the belief that one group, one people can achieve purity by venting cathartic rage upon another, would be and should be unthinkable. We would think instead in terms of divinity and kingdom rather than on politics and country. And I'm afraid, as I look at the many messianic posts on our own Facebook pages, that very few dyed-in-the-wool messianics are thinking kingdom style. So many are eaten up by rage, blood vengeance, fear, and the desire to get back at somebody, usually a neo-pagan person, politician, or organization, without the benefit of either kingdom permissions, divine weapons, or sacred knowledge. So many know the jargon, yet are completely caught up in the worldly way of vengeance, as weak, as ineffective as it is and always has been. People, you must strive to learn kingdom ways, Messiah's ways, and actions that betray your spiritual power as adopted sons and daughters of the King of Kings. This does not mean turning your weapons into plowshares necessarily, but applying the dynamics of the messianic kingdom and its King of Kings toward the problems that we're facing. And that's one of the reasons that so many of us are going back to Torah now, because we have in that moral absolutes that we can trust and that have been Elohim given. Liberalism, now under fire from so many quarters, is inconceivable without the backdrop of the Christian claim about persons. Liberalism, not talking about a political movement, I'm talking about freedom of persons. That's why liberalism can say without embarrassment that citizens who live in the bordered community that their state recognizes and enforces are equal under the law, that each of their votes count, that each of their preferences count. Because of Christianity, the liberal state, rather than the divine community, becomes thinkable. The question for America is simply this: can it become a model of the kingdom, or will it remain a battleground of local communities or tribes or races tearing down their own facilities, not unlike bacteria drowning in their own waste products? George Floyd's death and the violent aftermath has prompted questions about what sort of world we live in. If we live in a liberated world that Messianity makes possible, George Floyd's death is a singular transgression which law can and will punish. Floyd was a person, so too was the policeman who killed him. Persons are protected by the law, and those granted policing authority by the state have a somber responsibility to use their vested authority to protect persons rather than harm them. That's why the death of a civilian by police hands will always attract attention, especially the death of a Black citizen by any man of another skin color. However, as demonstrated again in our time, the death of a Black man becomes the catalyst for a national celebration of pagan vengeance and hatred, while the death of a white man goes quietly away. Those boundaries have to be done away with. I, for one, wondered why that has become the case until I heard the illiterate lawyer for Black Lives Matter giving the national microphone to spew suspicion, vile threats, vitriol against men and women of my race, those who had absolutely nothing to do with this, nothing to gain by this, and no opportunity to take up the microphones against it. The same original sin that is the basis for establishing potentially violent force of threateners must be watched vigilantly and must be taken care of by the law and people given the duty to enforce it. For this is in no way a matter of race. It is only a matter of law. And it's also a matter of faith that the law will take care of it, and the law is in the process of taking care of it even now. Yet these are not murder riots we are observing, they are race riots. The loudmouth protagonists and rabble-rousers have again made it so. The race baiters, the community organizers, and the violence and rhetoric is plainly enlisted. You if you are Black, and targeting you if you are not. It's a pagan, tribal, lawless message brandished like a club against millions of people who have nothing to do with this incident. What if we don't live in a liberated or liberal world that Christianity made possible? What if, under the pretext of liberalism and Christianity, America is still pagan? That is, what if America has always been a white nation and still is? For many white people, myself in particular, this is a pretty shocking statement that we live in a white nation or a Christian nation. For many black people, this is an unchallenged truth that they live in a white nation or a Christian nation. Yet this is the position of the American left today, white and black, and that Christianity is the root of the problem. It's a position that holds that the black man, George Floyd, and the white police officer responsible for his death are representatives of blood nations, racial nations, not singular persons. The murder of one by the other is representative of the collective murder of one people by the other. American law, they say, or Mosaic Torah, cannot bring justice because each blood nation has its own justice, from which marginalized blood nations can never benefit. American law is white law. Street vengeance, therefore, is the only recourse, whether we call them protests or riots. White people must die, as an exchange from a black person that I heard on the radio recently said. And a white person in exchange for the black people who have died. This pagan view certainly informs many analyses of America. What's striking, however, is that intermixed with this view is also a claim that each individual person who is white person should feel deep personal guilt about what has happened. In a purely pagan world, this would be unthinkable. Once a blood sacrifice was made, the score would be settled. In America today, there are some who are scoring accounts in this way. But what has been most remarkable about the aftermath of George Floyd's death has been the mix of pagan blood accounting and messianic liberal Christian guilt, which has taken the form of a kind of racial contrition, in which apologies are offered to members of the black nation by whites for their complicity in the murder, because they are members of a white nation. You get on Facebook today, and even in our Facebook site, there is an ad put there by Facebook that might as well say this very same thing, that we who are not black should feel guilt and repay for those that came before us who were or were not subjugators of the black races. I had nothing to do with that then. I know nothing about it. But this is the ploy that the liberals are giving us, wanting us to take on and pay back. And we've seen this, especially in this last election, time after time from the left and from white people. This is a fiction. This intermixed pagan and messianic logic is what we are seeing play out in America today, especially in its politics. Persons who, on liberal grounds, are not guilty of a crime confess their guilty complicity in the crime that through their proxy, a white policeman, they have committed. Hello? Hello? Is anybody there? Somebody say amen? It's not right. The problem of America, and not of America alone, is that she lies somewhere between paganism and messianity. The Christian hope that man treat his fellow man as a person was first violated by the legalized slavery of one race. We have yet to fully recover. As Tocqueville put it in Democracy in America, Christianity declared the equality of all men, and yet American Christians introduced slavery into their community. America, the country where Christianity held sway and where Christianity betrayed what Christianity proclaimed, then what true Christianity corrected. How then shall we proceed from here? Onward or backward? Toward the kingdom or back toward the gods? A return to paganism would spare us from the embarrassing messianic postulate that all the guilty before Elohim descendants of Adam are persons to be treated equally before the law. Pagan blood vengeance, we would contentedly conclude, is the primordial truth of man. Therefore, let us unleash the cathartic rage that dwells in every heart. If a man of one race is killed, blood payment is due. The score must be settled. Persons must be sacrificed so the gods of the bloodline of identity can be appeased. Alternatively, there's a messianic way forward through which we'll recognize the singular person of George Floyd, the transgression that ended his life, and the law through which man does what he can to bring about justice in a broken world that Elohim alone can heal. So Americans today are torn between the two distinctly different understandings of what justice entails. Pagan blood payment between peoples, which treats persons as mere proxies, or liberal, liberating justice, whose foundation is, finally, the messianic understanding of persons. Paganism, let us remember, is the natural condition of man, the condition for which there is no remedy without the divine antidote that breaks in upon the natural world and informs us that justice entails more than cathartic rage that settles scores. An observer with a trained eye will see in the aftermath of George Floyd's death an America that cannot decide between pagan justice and liberal justice, and which has settled into a dangerous and unstable intermediate arrangement having elements of both. Logic would dictate that either we go back to guiltless paganism or go forward to guilt-ridden, person-centered liberalism. We have instead guilt-ridden paganism, another name for which is identity politics. Thank you for listening.